Let's now look abroad a bit. As we look back at the Biden presidency, two major wars have unfolded around the world since he took office. Do Americans and voters here think that he's done a good job handling international issues?
Well, Americans think Biden hasn't done a good job on international issues. They don't give him good approval ratings. They're really concerned about weakness and whether or not we've been able to deter aggression around the world. I think that when you look at it, the support for the Ukraine has been flagging. Support for Israel is much stronger than you would guess based on the demonstrations going on, and seems to have really remained unchanged. And accountability for Biden is, well, would these situations have happened with a stronger president? What are we doing other than supplying arms to people to try to bring, these situations to a conclusion and a peaceful end?
Let's talk about Israel a bit and the Israel Hamas war. Since October 7th, we have seen a rise in anti Semitism. We've also seen voters vote uncommitted in protest to Biden's handling of the Middle East conflict. How do voters feel about this conflict overall?
Well, overall, we have some straightforward questions, and we say, are you basically more supportive of Israel or Hamas? And that's really the basic conflict that's going on now, and that comes out 80-20, and it really has been unchanged. Among young people, it's more 57 Israel, 43 Hamas. Some of the polls were 50-50. It's a smaller sample. But among seniors, say it's close to 95-5, 93-7 for Israel. So there is a huge generational divide on the issue. But overwhelmingly, then, when we dig down and say, well, look, do you think there should be a ceasefire? Oh, yeah, absolutely, there should be a ceasefire. But when do you think there should be a ceasefire? Oh, only when Hamas has released hostages and they've given up control of Gaza. So the real point here is that Israel is supported, and we even asked directly, even though there'd be civilian uh, casualties, should they continue their effort to end Hamas? And the answer is about two-thirds say yes. And so there's very strong underlying support, particularly if you're above age 24 or above age 40 in particular, for Israel. And it hasn't changed one point. So, if anything, the demonstrations have called into question what's going on in our universities more than anything else.
That's really interesting because if you look nationwide, these anti-Israel encampments and protests are popping up universities across the country. Just before you and I spoke, President Biden actually made remarks on this since police raided Colombia, and we've seen really these encampments reach a boiling point. And he spoke out against violence and hate speech when it comes to these protests. He also said the protests aren't changing his mind when it comes to his Middle East policy. Do you think that that's a stance voters will agree with?
I think they've been waiting for him to come out. I think he took a long time to come out. I think when you see, when voters see on television people taking the American flag down and putting another flag up, or a Palestinian flag, or what have you, that's not going to sit well with the majority of American voters. The overwhelming majority are looking at these pictures in horror. What's going on? People people are calling, for destruction of Jews and destruction of Israel, and I think they're really wondering, what exactly is going on in these campuses and how we're going to restore order. And I think that the university presidents and the universities that let it at first grow, every one of them realizes that it doesn't stop. It just keeps growing and then taking over more rather than less. And then they have to call the police in. And that happened at Columbia. It's happening at UCLA. And finally, the president is coming out. But they didn't stop this in the beginning when tents started to arrive. And now they have to do it at the end. University of Chicago, same thing now. We'll see what happens. The tents, and they're saying, well, as long as they're with tents. But then the demonstrators and the agitators, and then it turns out when they arrested people, only about half of them were actually students, and the rest of them are, people who came, some of them agitators. So this is really, playing out in a way that certainly people are not helping their cause in what they're doing. A lot of people are questioning what's going on in the universities, and I'm not seeing attitudes that are supportive. And 56% supported the full funding of Israel. I'm not seeing those attitudes change by even a point.
We're seeing this play out at elite universities in this country, like UCLA, like Yale, like Columbia. How do voters feel about this happening at those elite institutions?
Well, they're beginning to question now what is going on. If they're out demonstrating for Hamas, or even as Sheryl Sandberg did a film about the sexual violence, that Hamas did, and she wondered how can any young woman possibly be out there, in these encampments if they watched her film and understood, the violence and brutality, that occurred. And I think, Americans now are questioning, well, if this is what they're thinking about this on university, what else is going on there? And I think it's really opened up the university, which we saw had problems on this. The several university professors got fired. I think those questions are growing. And we asked in the poll, do you think there's something wrong? Almost two-thirds. And then we asked them, well, what do you think is wrong? And the answer that people came back was, well, we think that they're teaching racially divisive ways in the classes now. And they're beginning to blame what's going on in the classes for what's now going on outside the classes. And they think there's a direct connection here. And I don't know if there's going to be a reformation or change or a resetting of some of the education, but certainly the voters now are looking at the universities and asking some big questions.
This has been a big talking point, a big stumping point, education in this country, higher education for Republicans. Do you think that this issue is going to help President Trump and then in turn hurt President Biden in the poll?
Well, I never like to predict how issues are going to come out when they're in the middle, because issues have a way of offending. But I would again say, so far, having universities be out of control, and the president not having spoken until today, I think that left a clear field for the Republicans. Schumer came out, but that was not until Mike Johnson showed up on Columbia and was heckled and declared his strong support and opposition to these kinds of demonstrations that are not about free speech, but are taking over property and defacing buildings and threatening, putting up signs that deliberately threaten Jews. But how is it that Johnson got out there first, Trump got out there first, and Schumer and Biden got out there second? I think those were mistakes on their part. Can they correct them? Like I said, it's not over until it's over. But the Republicans got to jump on this issue, no question.